Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 388 of the All Dolphins podcast on this Tuesday, October 22nd, 2024. It's time for Behind Enemy Lines, Arizona Cardinals edition. And for this episode, I am joined by longtime NFL writer Howard Balzer, who covers the Cardinals back from the time when they were in St. Louis. He's also a Pro Football Hall of Fame selector. He also is a radio show host on Serum XM NFL Radio, Cardinals reporter for Cards Wire. You also do the Lindy's Pro Football Preview magazine. Am I missing anything there, Howard?
I don't think so. I think you got it pretty good. Good to be with you. And you said 388, but who's counting, right? Woo, it's a lot of podcasts.
I keep track. I don't even know why I do this, and I've been scolded for why do you number them? I don't know, because I'm anal and that's something I like to do. Who knows?
You can have confetti when you hit number 400?
500 maybe. 500, and I think I made a Dolphin hat when I reached 15,000 subscribers. We're not quite there yet. So, folks, subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe and all that. Okay, so let's get into it. Dolphins at 2-4 face the Arizona Cardinals at 3-4, fresh off a Monday night win, last second win against the LA Chargers, 17-15. And Howard, I'm going to be honest with you. I watched the whole game because the Dolphins' next opponents, and it's like, man, that's an unimpressive Arizona Cardinals team. And yet they have wins now against the 49ers and the Chargers, who are supposedly going to be better under Jim Harbaugh. So what do we make of this Cardinals team?
Hard really to make anything of them right now because they are so Jekyll and Hyde. And that's kind of the way it's been. I mean, the first three games, they lost to Buffalo by 6 on the road, then just dominated the Rams, division rival, of course, then played a very tough game against the Lions and kept them from scoring in the second half and lost by a touchdown. Then they get blown out by Washington, turn around and beat San Francisco on a last-second field goal, then get blown out by Green Bay. Come back from that, and we have the game last night where the one thing they really did, I think, was to keep everybody engaged defensively, was stop the run, which had been a real problem since week 3. And so they were able to do that, but again, bounce back from a bad loss. And, offensively, it just seems disjointed. Kyler Murray can't get on the same page with Marvin Harrison Jr., but they have James Conner. And I'm telling you, James Conner is just, if you were to look up warrior in the dictionary, that is James Conner. And the 3 games that they have won, he's had big games. The 4 games they've lost, not so much. Now, one of those losses, he did have over 100 yards rushing, but the numbers are just, crazy in the games that they've won. And so, granted, a couple of those that they've lost, when you fall behind, you stop running the ball and all that. But he is the heart and soul of this team. Many players talked about that after the game last night, and it was revealed that Jonathan Gannon went up to James Conner early in the week, coming off that win or loss to Green Bay, and he said, "Hey, James, we're 2-4. I think it's time that you say a few words, Captain." And so he spoke to the team on Sunday night in his quiet. He's not a real loud guy. He doesn't talk a lot, but it's like the old line when James Conner talks, people listen. And he, everyone talked about what he means to the team on and off the field. Now, of course, if they lose that game, no one's talking about the speech, right? And it was very, very easily could have lost it if they don't get down the field. But he had that 33-yard run on a check down in that final drive, which put them in position to run the clock and force the Chargers to use their final timeouts and kick the field goal as time expired. So, but like I said, he is the heart and soul. Kelvin Beachum, the starting right tackle, called him the lifeblood of this team, and the example he sets, especially off the field. I'll tell you one quick story. Pretty sure it was after the Rams game where he had a big game, and he spoke to the media on Monday, and someone asked, "Well, how did you celebrate?" He says, "Celebrate?" He says, "I came back here to the facility immediately after leaving the stadium to start getting into my recovery for next week with the sauna and the hot tub and the cold tub and all those things." So I almost asked him last night saying, "Hey, it's pretty late now. Are you going to stop at the facility tonight to get ahead of it?" Because now, of course, they have a short week. But, Like I said, he's the key to this team. They're still trying to find themselves offensively, and they've had a bunch of injuries. A lot of teams have had that, but they always feel, man, that if they're at least able to keep the game close, they'll have a chance to win those games. And except for the two bad losses, they've been, and the big win, they've been one-score games, and now they've won two of those in a row.
Yeah, I can assure you, Dolphin fans here don't want to hear about other teams' injury issues now that they were without their starting quarterback for the past 4 games, although he's coming back. James Conner, by the way, if folks don't know or not aware, is a nice inspirational story. He had a major health situation. I think dates back to his days at the University of Pittsburgh. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe he had cancer, and then he overcame
That's
that.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a guy who cherishes every opportunity he has. And I'm looking at the Cardinals' schedule so far, and then what you've told me is basically it's been good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. So if last night they were good, that means they're due for a bad game against the Dolphins on Sunday, which is good news for the Dolphins because they could use the win. Plus, it's a short week traveling from Arizona to South Florida.
The interesting thing is we know how fan bases react in the most overreactive sport that there is in the land, and I have a term that I like to use called collective amnesia. That everyone forgets what they said a few weeks ago, a few months ago, whatever it was. And when the schedule came out last May, everyone looked at it and said, "Boy, for a rebuilding team, the start of this schedule is brutal." With 5 of the first 6 against playoff teams from last year, and 6 of the first 8 against playoff teams. Then it eases up. And yet when they're sitting there 2-4 after a bad win, everybody, the rebuild isn't working. They need to make changes. And we know how the way fans react. But this was the beginning against a tough team, yes, but not a great team, obviously. And at home, this was the beginning of where the schedule eases up somewhat. And they need to take advantage of it because in the final 11 games, counting last night, and now the next 10, there's only 3 teams that were in the playoffs last year. So we'll see if they're able to capitalize on that. You mentioned win-lose. They've never so far. And of course, when you say never, when there's only been, what's the number now? So, 24 games of the Jonathan Gannon era. It's only been 24 games, but they've yet to win 2 games in a row. I don't think that's that surprising when you've only won 7 in last year and this year, but they haven't been able to win 2 in a row. Now they'll be looking at that, but knowing after a very physical game last night that obviously they're on a short week, they're going to travel to South Florida on Friday. Normally when the Cardinals do that, when they're playing a team in the Eastern or Central time zone, because it's, a 10 a.m. body clock game for the Cardinals. And so they'll travel Friday after a Monday night game. So we'll see how they're able to rebound from that.
Okay. And it's interesting too, and this is the point I've made here on the podcast several times, that the schedule, we project it based on last year's record. Once the season starts, things change. So for example, you mentioned the Cardinals' really tough opening schedule. The one easy game that it looked like it was going to be easy was Washington before the season started, and Washington's pretty damn good now. So things change. So I watched Kyler Murray play, and I may not have seen him play before, but it's like, first of all, he's fun to watch because it's basically like a pinball back there with his running ability and all that. The passing is on and off. Like it seems to me like he misses some very easy throws. Then he can make some really good throws. Where do you stand or sit as you're doing right now with him as a quarterback?
Yeah, it's still a work in progress. Even though he says this is the best I've felt, this is the best I feel about where my game is and the team around me since he's been in Arizona, which is interesting to hear from that after that 2021 season when they started out 7-0 and then lost a tough Thursday night game to the Packers, and in which he got injured. And so the biggest thing to me so far is that he played the final 8 games last year and now the first 7 games this year. So it's close to a full season, and he hasn't been affected by injury. But overall, it's still a work in progress as he's now in his first full season with a new offense, with a lot of new players, maybe not a lot of new players, but a team around him. When you look, and here's one of the things I think is that there were so high expectations with the arrival of Marvin Harrison Jr. that everybody thinks, oh, you just snap your finger, rookie's going to walk on the field and everything's going to be great. Well, sometimes it happens. More often than not, it does not, at least right out of the box. And this is an inexperienced receiver core. I mean, right now, Marvin Harrison's played 7 career games. Michael Wilson has played 20. Greg Dortch, where most of his games early in his career were on special teams, he's played 46. I mean, and then Zay Jones could end up being a key because he missed the first 5 games under suspension. Came back last night for his first game, but was only on the field for 11 snaps. You have to believe that is going to increase. He's the veteran in that receiver room right now. And even their excellent tight end, Trey McBride, is in his 3rd season. So they're very young, inexperienced, and they're trying to find themselves right now. And I think, yes, Murray misses some throws. There's somebody makes great ones, his legs, obviously, but for this team in terms of the offense playing together is still, trying to figure out a lot of teams, and especially with the way defenses are playing them. So we'll see if it improves, down the stretch. The interesting thing is the first 2 games of the season were probably their best, but everyone was really expecting still some rustiness left over from last year, and really good game against Buffalo. The Rams was just off the chart. And since then, I don't think they've reached 60 plays in a game since week 2. And the average per play is low. And so that's why it's come down to a lot of times when they win, it's because of his legs and a combination of that with James Conner. And the defenses know that. And they have to obviously try to figure out a way to stop it.
I look at Marvin Harrison, and I don't know if it's because he wears 18 and the body type is kind of similar, but I kind of get like AJ Green vibes. What's it? Has he not done as well as perhaps hoped? It's as you mentioned, very early in his career, but I think a lot of people, as you mentioned, were expecting him to come in and boom, be a complete stud right from the start. Where has he been good? Where has he not been as good?
I think a certain amount of it is just getting on the same page with Murray. There's been some miscommunications. That's part of it. Jonathan Gannon said something interesting a week or so ago when he was asked about what's going on between Murray and him. And he talked about we've had to make some adjustments because of his stride length, and it's because of his body type. And so there has to be an adjustment there. Is he going to be where Kyler Murray expects him to be in the passing game? And so he said we've had to make some adjustments on that because he's not one of those, quote, quick twitch guys or a guy that just bursts off the line of scrimmage and gets into his route quickly. He's more of a smooth, efficient guy, but sometimes he's not getting open that quickly. And certainly we know that receivers coming into the league have the big adjustment going against NFL defensive backs. That's a reality. I mean, there's no, and I've always said this, man, no matter how good the competition is that you have played in college, no matter what conference you're in, even if you're in one of the better conferences, you still have, let's say in a 12-game regular season, you still have probably 8 games, maybe 7 against teams that just are average at best and don't have high quality guys in the secondary. Well, now you're going against teams that, even if you're not going against Pro Bowl guys, they're still NFL players. And you have to adjust to that and figure out how you're going to get open. And then, like I said, for Murray to figure out where he's going to be and have that timing work in the offense. So I think it's fallen down a little bit there. I haven't watched last night's game closely yet, but I heard some comments that there seemed to be some plays where he wasn't giving it his all because he probably knew the play wasn't coming to him. That's a non-starter with this team. And I don't know how they deal with that with a guy that was the 4th overall pick and is making an awful lot of money. But, Jonathan Gannon preaches that team first and the effort, the energy, play with violence, even for offensive guys. And so it's going to be really interesting because here we are. I mean, it's hard to believe, man. We're almost halfway through the season. And so you wonder how much is this going to improve coming down the second half of the season.
Okay. Yeah, the Cardinals did a good job last night on defense, but I look at that unit and I'm like, Buda Baker, Gardeck's a nice linebacker, but you want to talk about, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's because the Cardinals are playing Arizona and they're not often on national television. But it's like a bunch of guys whose names I don't recognize. Is there anybody there who stands out?
Mason Baker, the guy next to him at safety, Jalen Thompson, I think is one of the more underrated and overlooked safeties in the NFL. That's an excellent tandem. After that, it's mostly a lot of young guys. And last night, when Sean Murphy-Bunting went out for the second consecutive game with a neck injury, I think he played only 21 snaps. I mean, they're playing in the secondary a guy Star Thomas V, who they picked up on waivers at the cut down last year. Max Melton, who was getting a lot of snaps in the last two games because of Murphy-Bunting being out. He's a second-round pick this year. Garrett Williams was a third-round pick last year, would have been a higher pick had he not torn his ACL in college at Syracuse, missed basically the first half of the season. He's going to be a good player. But there's just a lot of youth throughout this roster. They don't have, a top-notch edge rusher. And one of their better guys, Dennis Gardeck, got hurt last night. Don't know the extent of that yet. And on the defensive line, where they really tried to upgrade it in the offseason with two free agents, unrestricted free agents, Justin Jones and Bilal Nichols, who had been durable throughout their entire career. They're both on injured reserve and done for the season. Darius Robinson, their second first-round pick, hasn't played yet because of a calf injury. And so the defensive line is just a bunch of try-hard guys that, have a little bit of an issue. But it was interesting to see the way they were able to stop the run last night. The one interesting pickup is Mac Wilson Sr., the guy who plays next to Kaiser White at inside linebacker, who they really saw something in. He'd been with New England, hadn't started a lot of games, but they really saw a guy that they thought would be a very good player and be a playmaker. And he has been that. But right now, they just don't have enough of those guys. And I mentioned the edge rushers, B.J. Ojolari, a second-round pick last year, who was ticketed to do, they hoped would do a lot of great things this season. He tore his ACL about a week into training camp. So he's done for the year. So, we know that the old cliche, all teams have injuries. But when you've lost your three defensive line starters by, less than halfway through the first, you're less than halfway through the season, and they're out. Robinson is supposed to come back soon. He returned to practice 2 weeks ago. But when you lose, that many guys and you're playing with youth, you're going to have mistakes. You're going to have errors. You're going to have things go against you. I think they're on the right track, but certainly we know that health is paramount in the NFL for a lot of those things to happen.
So possibly Robinson in the lineup against the Dolphins on Sunday?
It's interesting because the first week, everyone was all excited when he came back and was on the field a little bit, but was mostly watching in what we were able to see. And he was listed as limited. Then all of a sudden he didn't practice the next 2 days, and it was said that he had some discomfort. Then it was believed he was going to come back and practice last week, but he wasn't seen by anyone. He did put on social media that his mom had passed away. So how much of that was a part of it? But he didn't practice at all last week. So this is his last week of practice before they have to make a decision next week. So, we'll find out. They're not practicing obviously today or tomorrow. So we'll find out on Thursday what his status is. But it looks to me like it's a long shot that he would be able to get out there this week. And if he did, it probably wouldn't be for very many snaps.
Gotcha. A couple of quick notes on some Arizona defensive players. So yesterday I'm watching the game, and there's a sack, and they say by Naquan Jones. I'm like, wait a second, I recognize that name. Dolphin practice squad, and I wasn't aware that the Cardinals signed him off the Dolphin practice squad, and here he is contributing a sack to the defensive effort last night. And then you mentioned Sean Murphy-Bunting. Dolphin fans might remember him in a bad way because he's the guy who landed on Tyreek Hill with a hip drop tackle in the Monday night game against Tennessee last year that kind of derailed Tyreek's season, which appeared headed for a 2,000-yard receiving output. So two guys to watch over there. And any feel on the Cardinal? I think the expectation from a Dolphin standpoint and from a Dolphin fan standpoint is obviously the offense is going to be a lot better with with Tua in the lineup, even if there's some rust there because the backup quarterback play was, how can I say this politely, subpar. And based on what you're telling me, it seems to me that this is a very, very good spot for the Dolphins. Do you see the Cardinals as being a type of team that could give the Dolphins trouble here?
It could be a good spot for the Dolphins, certainly. And as we saw last night's game, as I mentioned, the biggest thing is that the Cardinals didn't get into that. It was a grinded out game, but they didn't get into one of those games where the other team's just running the ball down your throat. And so, they really held J.K. Dobbins down. That forced them to pass a whole lot more, I'm sure, than they were hoping to and planned to. And Justin Herbert passed for 349 yards. And in the two wins in the last 3 weeks against the 49ers were 1 for 6 in the red zone and had a total of 16 points in the game. And that's what kept the Cardinals in the game and allowed them to win late. Now, last night, the Chargers only reached the end zone reached the red zone once. However, they were in Cardinal territory numerous times. But the 5 field goals was all they got, and those drives were stopped on third down play. And so that could be the key. How efficient will Tua and the offense be on third down? The Cardinals haven't been that good on third down over the last month or so, and they weren't great last night. But those 5 that they didn't make were obviously very big, because heck, if the Dolphins just score 1 or 2 touchdowns on those drives, there's probably no way the Cardinals win. And so that'll probably end up being a huge factor in the game, and whether the Dolphins can run it a little bit. Because I'll tell you, that game started out last night, and you're going, man, this is going to be a long night. I mean, Dobbins ran for 11 yards on his first 2 carries. The Chargers went down the field 85 yards in 6 plays. But, of course, there was the fumble at the end of that drive that was knocked out inside the 5 and went through the end zone for a touchback, which is one of the worst rules in NFL history, but the Cardinals will take it. And so it looked like it was going to be a long night, but figure it out. I mean, Dobbins, I think, was 17 for 40 in the game. So after those first 2, what was that be? 15 for 29, something like that. So that could end up being a key if the Dolphins feel, so I don't know if they're going to come back. I'd be a little surprised if they just come back and, throwing the ball all over the yard. But, Tua is obviously capable of that. But, certainly I think if they can run the ball and control the clock, then that could keep the ball out of the Cardinals' hands for those times when they get something moving on offense.
Yeah, and the Dolphins did run the ball 40 times or more each of the last 2 games. Part of that is because right now their passing game was so deficient with Tyler Huntley, all due respect, as a starting quarterback. So I think you're going to see more of a balance. I don't know. They're not going to run 40 times. I'd be very surprised, even if they don't chuck it all over the place. Okay, we're going to switch gears here real quickly. As I mentioned earlier, Howard is a Pro Football Hall of Fame elector, and I get questions all the time over here and on social media as well about Dolphin candidates. So in the past few weeks, as a list gets narrower in terms of modern era nominees, on my list I have Wes Welker made it to the next round. I believe Richmond Webb as well. And in the seniors category, and by all means, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, as I'm prone to be, I have Clayton, Bob Kuchenberg, and Dick Anderson. And then most recently in the coaches category, Bill Arnsparger. If you were to guess, I know you have certain restrictions on what you're allowed to say, I believe. If you were to guess which of those 6 might be the best shot for the next Jimmy Dolphin Hall of Famer, if any of them are, where would you go with this?
I would say that the 2 most likely, I've been flummoxed, quite honestly, that Bob Kuchenberg isn't in yet. Mm-hmm. And he was a finalist. I'd have to look it up, something like 6 or 7 times in the modern day, when he was a modern day player. He's been on that list as a senior. This is my 3rd year on the seniors committee. And since they started doing it differently with having 3 seniors finalists each year. And a couple of years ago, I'm pretty sure he made the final 12, where the final vote comes from. And then last year he didn't. So sometimes you just wonder how certain things happen. By the way, that announcement of the next cut for the Hall of Fame, and I presume maybe this might even run when it's over, occurs at 2:00 Eastern today on Tuesday. So we'll know the next cut of the seniors group. We haven't voted yet on the next cut for the modern day guys, but so I think Kuchenberg is deserving. There's only going to be 9 finalists this year instead of 12 before you get to the true final 3. And I'll tell you something, when you look at that list, you look at it and go, oh my goodness. I mean, I would say if you went up to football fans on the street and gave them there'd be at least 10 or 15 guys that, oh, he's not in the Hall of Fame yet? He's not in the Hall of Fame? It's just pretty wild. I do think Richmond Webb is deserving. I think some of the things that happen, especially with offensive linemen, does a guy like him rise to the level? I don't know that you should have to, but in some people's mind it does. Does he rise to the level of some of the guys that have gone in over the last couple of decades with Walter Jones and Orlando Pace and Jonathan Ogden and guys like that? But the guy was a hell of a player. But the one thing I always say to people is everybody can't get in. And there's a lot of great players that have played this game. And it just comes down to the way it goes with the vote. And the other thing we never know is when, let's say you have that vote for the final 15, you don't know who was 16th. You don't know who was 17th. You don't know how many votes they missed by. It's probably not very many. But that separates from a guy being a Hall of Famer sometimes and a guy not being. So, those 2 guys would be the ones I think from the ones you mentioned that are most deserving. And I just have a sense Kuchenberg is going to get in one of these years. I mean, it just seems to me it just can't keep on and on and on like this. Richmond probably has a little, tougher path.
Is it possible he gets dinged because the Dolphins lines of the 70s already have 2 members in the Hall of Fame with Jim Langer and Larry Little?
I've often wondered that, and I figured that that could be an issue there. I wasn't a selector then, but I think that has affected players over the years. And some will say, "What? How many guys on that team could be Hall of Famers?" I mean, look how long it took Jerry Kramer from those great Packers teams to get in. I mean, I think he went in more than 50 years after his final game. And when you look back at the years that he was a finalist among the modern day guys, all the other Packers that were finalists who then got in, and then after a while, maybe there is some weariness with Packers. I think we've seen it with the Steelers. It took Donnie Shell until the centennial class of 2020 to get in. L.C. Greenwood is on the list of seniors, and many say he's worthy. But heck, Mean Joe Green is on from that line. So I think that can be an issue sometimes with those teams that have won a lot, have had a lot of Hall of Famers, and I don't know that it's conscious, but you do think that maybe that voters are looking, let's look at somebody else. I don't think that's right. If a guy's a Hall of Famer, he's a Hall of Famer. And when you get that support to be a finalist, especially among those modern day 15s, that's hard just to make that, just to get to that 15. But then not to advance, but so many times. And here's one of the things about the numbers. It's a pure numbers game when you really break it down this way. You have 15 modern day finalists, usually 5 get in each year. That brings 10 guys back the following year to the finalists, unless somebody drops into the seniors pool. So that's 10. Now you only got 5 spots for finalists. Then you have first-time eligible guys. And I do think sometimes there's a little bit of too much of, hey, and I'll say it straight out. I'm not saying Jason Taylor isn't a Hall of Famer. I'm not so sure he should have been a first-time eligible guy. But there's a recency thing there where it's you've seen this guy a lot more recently than some of the others. And so all of a sudden those so let's say you have 3 first-time eligibles that are among the modern day. Well, guess what? That's only spots then for 2 other guys to enter that top 15 and be discussed by the full committee. So there's no true answer to solve that. It's just a reality of the way the numbers work. And unfortunately, a lot of times it works against some guys.
Yeah, and I would make him a pitch myself for Bill Parker for being the architect of those 70 Super Bowl defenses that have only one member in the Hall of Fame, that being Nick Bonacani, which was good enough to lead the way for 2 Super Bowls, and then came back 10 years later with the Killer Bees, which was the sole reason the Dolphins went to the Super Bowl in that strike-shortened season when they were choking everybody to death with that defense. I think this guy, deserves serious consideration. I don't know if he's going to get in or not, but of those
don't
on
get
the
me
list.
started. Don't get me started on assistant coaches, because it's almost impossible. It's hard enough to get a coach in, what's more an assistant coach. And I think any guy who's been around a long time could probably, off the top of their head, list 20 assistant coaches, whether it's guys like Orange Parker, Jimmy Johnson, Joe Collier. Those are just 3 that come off the top of my head. Offensive coordinator, guys that just did it for a long time. I mean, even offensive line coaches. Dante Scarnecchia, who I think stayed with the Patriots through, I've lost track of how many head coaching changes they had with that team, and they always kept him. And he was a big part of that Patriots winning, especially with Bill Belichick. But those guys hardly get a sniff. Yeah. And you mentioned Orange Parker on the list of, coach guys that made the next list. And then you have the head coaches. Mike Holmgren's been close, hasn't got in yet. Dan Reeves, Marty Schottenheimer, Tom Coughlin. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody off the top of my head. There's so many that are deserving from head coaches that to get an assistant in, and it's one of the reasons the Hall of Fame started, and these awards of excellence that don't get a lot of coverage. Nobody talks about them that much, but they've included equipment managers in there, PR guys, and people like that. But they've also included assistant coaches, because they realize that it's just a very, very difficult path to get an assistant coach elected by the committee and get a bust in that great gallery in Canton, Ohio.
Yeah, 2 quick things before we wrap this up. You mentioned media relations people. The great Harvey Green, longtime media directors of the Dolphins, got a Hall of Fame recognition. And you mentioned Jimmy Johnson, for those who might be going, Jimmy Johnson, he was a head coach. No, he was a longtime defensive coordinator with the Philadelphia Eagles, another Jimmy Johnson. So on that note, as I said, we are going to wrap it up. Howard, much appreciated for the time. You catch his work. Again, 17 different places. Here we go. Cardinals, Cards Wire, the weekly Hall of Fame radio show on Sirius XM NFL Radio. That's on Saturdays or Sundays, or both, Howard? Howard, are you there?
That's a lot of it. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, no, I was checking to make sure I got the correct day for the radio show on Sirius XM NFL Radio. That's on Saturdays, correct?
Yeah, no, you did, and you did.
Okay.
Well, yeah, it runs on Wednesday evening, and then it gets repeated, a couple times. But if I could, I'll tell a quick Harvey Green story, which is pretty wild, because when I left to go to the Sporting News in 1978, I was living in New York, and I was actually the play-by-play typist at Madison Square Garden for all the basketball games there on an old Smith Corona typewriter, right? And that was one of the things I missed most about leaving New York to go to St. Louis. But going to the Sporting News changed my life, and obviously that changed my career. But the crazy thing was that many years later at a Super Bowl in Miami, we're on the way to a special dinner on Saturday night. We're in a shuttle, and Harvey Green's there, and I'd known Harvey over the years. And all of a sudden, he breaks it to me then. This is years after I'd been in St. Louis. He says, you know what, Howard? You probably don't know this. When you left New York for St. Louis, I replaced you as the play-by-play typist at Madison Square Garden. Nice. So I said, oh, well, then we're definitely connected in that way. So I never knew that until he told me. That was pretty wild story.
Very nice. Yeah. Very nice. Howard, thanks very much again. Guys, please, hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, subscribe, share, download, whatever you need to do. We will be back here on Wednesday. We'll have the first injury report of the weekend prediction. It's going to say Tua Tagovailoa, I'm going to guess full questionable, because he has the clear concussion protocol, the NFL's concussion protocol, and that can't be done until the day after he practices to a certain level to make sure there are no symptoms. The expectation is that he will play Sunday, but we'll have all the latest developments. Until then, thanks everyone, and thanks again, Howard.